First of all, I'm glad to be here. And so the fascinating thing is that it's not happening in an isolated way. It's happening in a very coherent, kind of collaborative fashion as part of an ecosystem that is emerging in the Western world, that is being shaped by companies, large companies, startups, universities that are beginning to teach a new generation of students to think and frugally and flexibly and frugally and inclusively as well. And then government agencies as well are getting into it. And I've been working personally with Jaideep with some of these entities. But the really exciting part is that, you see, in India, Jugaad is not happening inside a large institution. It's happening in the street. Jugaad for me is about being street smart. So it's about citizens being very clever in dealing with issues every day they face. And that's why what we are finding is that actually in the Western world, citizens also are becoming more empowered and using new technologies actually to take their lives and destinies into hand and find betterment for themselves and others. So what we will do is actually talk about briefly some of the leading companies, first of all, who are kind of pioneering this new frugal, flexible approach to innovation. Of course, the first company we want to talk about is Renault-Nissan, the global car alliance between Renault, the French company, and Nissan, the Japanese company. I had the pleasure to launch this book with Carlos Ghosn, who is the chairman and CEO of the Renault-Nissan Alliance in New York about 2 years ago. And he shared some very interesting comment on stage on how he interprets Jugaad in relation with the Western world. He said, in the West, when we face huge problems and we lack resources, we tend to give up too easily. Jugaad is about never giving up. For him, Jugaad is not about doing innovation at all. It's more about the resilience. The resilience that whatever happens, I can survive. I can make it true. That for him is the essence of Jugaad. The question is, how do you impart this kind of mindset in an environment like France where you have plenty of resources? It's impossible, right? So that kind of constrained environment exists in our country because any of us who have navigated our traffic jams in this country know how complex the circulation, the traffic situation is in India, right? So to build that kind of empathy with drivers in India, you cannot do that sitting in Paris. You cannot create a car for India sitting in Paris. So he dispatched Gérard de Tourbet, who was the father of a previous low-cost car that Renault-Nissan has introduced in Europe, which is called Logan, which has since become a bestseller in Western Europe, to actually come live in southern India, in Chennai actually, out of where he's now developing a whole new car platform. And a car platform, for those of you who may not know it, is a sacrosanct decision that never gets made outside headquarters of Western companies. It's one thing to create a new car in an emerging market, but a new car platform is something that is very strategic. And that's now being executed out of Chennai. So this is going to be a new architecture. It's called CMF-A. A stands for affordability. And this is going to be shared between Renault and Nissan. And they're going to be building a whole new portfolio of vehicles that are going to be entering into production beginning next year. They will be initially commercialized in India, Africa, and Brazil, and later potentially introduced in the Western world as well. And one thing that he said, I think Carlos Ghosn, that I found very profound, is that he didn't say that Jugaad is better than what we are doing in France or what Nissan is doing in Japan. We actually see a new model emerging, we'll talk about at the end of this presentation, which is a kind of a networked approach to innovation, where you try to leverage what each region has to offer and try to drive synergies, as he says, which is integrate and synergize the Jugaad mindset of Indian engineers with what French are good at, which is this top-down project management expertise, and what Japanese are excellent, which is technical expertise. And 1 + 1 + 1 will equal 111 and not just 3, right? That is really the idea. So we are beginning to see, I will just kind of go quickly, but some other case studies which are very interesting. Jaideep has been working with Pearson, which is a global education company headquartered in UK. And they are actually trying to look at kind of Jugaad or frugal ways. I say more than frugal, which is very new, clever ways to actually find ways to impart more education to more people around the world, whether it's leveraging MOOC kind of technologies. And many of the solutions are looking at could even be low-tech. And that's something to remember, is that Jugaad is not always either low-tech or high-tech. It depends on the context. In some contexts, what we call high-tech Jugaad, we'll talk about in a few minutes. Sometimes you need low-tech Jugaad. Of course, we always lash on into the low-tech Jugaad and say that's shoddy product, right? But actually, there are some high-tech versions of Jugaad applications we'll talk about as well. So they want to create a portfolio of solutions that leverage this kind of Jugaad mindset to create more educational opportunities for children and adults worldwide. We are also seeing Nestle, which is flipping its business model from selling what dairy products or traditional food items to getting into what they call the wellness industry. Right? This is a big trend we see in the packaged consumer goods industry. And they are actually embracing, these are two people a bit out of Germany's technical center, R&D center, who are actually pioneering or shepherding or championing this new initiative called lean innovation, which is really how do you create more value for people. And value here is not just taste better, actually makes people feel healthier. Right? Food items that make people get healthier at the same time with a low cost target. They call it lean innovation. But what's happening, which is exciting personally for me, based in Silicon Valley, is that we are beginning to see a new generation of entrepreneurs who are not interested in just creating the next application for Facebook or Twitter, but actually create serious applications that solve real world problems, like let's say healthcare. So this is a graduate from Berkeley who actually has started this company called CellScope. They sell these accessories that you can attach to your smartphone, and they converts your smartphone into an otoscope. So a mother, without having to go to see a doctor, can check if her daughter has ear problem, infection, right? And what is exciting is that you can swap, you can replace that attachment with another attachment, and it transforms your smartphone into a dermoscope to see if you have a skin problem. Right? And what's exciting is that these attachments cost 10% of the lowest end product used by doctors. And as I said earlier, this is a new trend, which is, I say in the first graphic, which is empowering citizens to take their own health into hands, and we call it also preventive medicine as well. To do that, the solutions have to be affordable, easy to use as well, right? So that takes a particular kind of way of thinking to come up with these solutions. So the idea was, under Rich Serino, who was a visionary leader of FEMA, is to begin to build partnerships with the hackers, to say, these kind of Jugaad innovators are not actually breaking any law, because actually, remember the framework we used, they are trying to not violate the system, but they're trying to fix the system when it's deficient. Okay? So let's leverage them to create more value for citizens at lower cost. And they started using them more and more. They set up an innovation team with a young person, 27 years old, to start working with these kind of Jugaad innovators. And since then, it has created more innovation, social innovation in the society than they could have done in a very top-down structured way. And I've also been teaching a lot in Western universities, especially in France. This is #1 elite school in France, Mines Paris-Tech. Where the young students seem to really resonate with this kind of Jugaad spirit. And so our main conclusions is that Jugaad is actually a global phenomenon. It, of course, we breathe and in and out everyday Jugaad in this part of the world, but it's also becoming a global phenomenon. We think, of course, India has a distinctive advantage because we actually in a way invented it. So we should kind of leverage it and build on it. Now the South is showing that we also innovate, except we all innovate different way. It's called Jugaad, right? So the question is not that whether Jugaad is better than the way that is done in the Western world. It's how do you bring synergies between these two approaches. So we have been talking about this notion of building global innovation networks, which is how do you kind of combine the talent, expertise, ideas, and capabilities of different parts of the world to co-create solutions that will be valuable not just for the North or South, but for the entire planet. And final message is that many of you may be leaders, and of course the most prevalent innovation model, and I would say organizational model that we are familiar with, looks more like an orchestra, right? Very top down. And to manage this kind of organization, you need orchestration skills more than anything else. And of course, Jugaad for me is more like a Jugalbandi, right? It's a much more like improvisation. Or in the Western context, we call it a jazz band, right? So more fluid, more improvised. You kind of riff off, as we say, from each other's improvisation. We are not saying that one model is better than another from a leadership standpoint, but rather it's about thinking about it as a pendulum and using your wisdom or your discernment to say, in what context we need to apply one approach and another context we need another approach, right? So that kind of discernment and differentiation is really what constitutes what we call wise leadership. So the whole purpose of our book is not to kind of introduce a better model than what we are familiar with, but rather introduce an alternative model that could enrich your leadership toolkit. So that is kind of essentially what we are hoping for.